get any pushback from the less hills?
We have found it much easier here in the Midwest. Probably because we're working on a smaller scale. Probably because most of our landscape is agricultural. And so there's not a lot of wildlands to burn. But where I'm at Hitchcock, it's a 1,200 acre preserve that we started burning in 1998. And initially, the old timers said, they all said, oh yeah, of course, I remember when my grandpa was burning these hills. Or, you know, these hills used to burn all the time. I can remember that as a kid. And these hills need it. And then the young people, especially the people who had moved out of the city, were like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? This is awful. And so the old timers understood, and the newcomers weren't very tolerant, but very quickly they saw that we were capable of doing this, and they saw the results, and so they're on board.
Okay.
And it happened really quickly.
Okay.
It's not happened that way out west.
That's be about right for me. So, how many acres do you burn in Pot County now?
We're burning about 1,000 in the fall and 300, 400, maybe 500 in the spring.
Okay. And does Harrison County have a similar plan, or?
Harrison County Conservation burns. They don't burn as much as we do.
Okay.
They're beginning to burn more. Most of the fire that they do is in the spring, but they're beginning to do a little bit in the fall also.
Okay. Because we see a lot of yours is in the fall.
Yes. Yeah, that's not typical.
Oh, okay.
Most organizations in Iowa are burning in the spring.
When it's more wet, or?
I think that's actually kind of an artifact of the Euro-American and agricultural mentality.
Okay.
I mean, the evidence shows that most fires were happening in the fall historically. But for some reason, science and culture, our culture, has pushed all of this to the spring.
Okay.
And when I started burning, I was burning in the spring because everybody else was. And I think that's the way a lot of people are. But as I learned more and more about it, and also saw the results, that has pushed me towards fall fire. And other people are starting to do that too.
Okay.
Here in Iowa, sometimes winter doesn't ever get snow. Do you guys ever burn when that happens?
In the winter? Yeah, we will burn anytime in the dormant season. So as soon as everything goes dormant in the fall, after the first killing frost, things start going dormant. And it's likely that we're going to get that first killing frost tonight. Or maybe tomorrow night.
Be ready.
Yeah.
Cover your plants if you want it to last.
Not today. It's like
we did have some frost this morning. Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah. My dad couldn't see it.
Yeah. And so things start shutting down after that frost, and that's when we'll start burning. And we can burn any time until things start to green up in the winter or in the spring. So that whole dormant season is when we're looking to burn. Usually we get most of it done in the fall, before the snows come and start to compress the leaf litter and smash down the grasses. We like to burn when everything's fluffy and standing up. Good question.
Well, obviously you've been burning for several years. Are you reburning areas?
Oh yeah. I mean, we're now burning everything every year.
Oh.
Much more like the Native Americans were doing.
Okay.
What we found is there's a lot of concern because only 1/10% of Iowa is natural anymore.
Right.
There's a lot of concern that if you burn everything, then you're killing all the bugs, and there's no overwintering habitat and things like that. And so what we used to do was we'd say, okay, we're going to burn this area this year in the spring, and then next year we'll burn this in the fall, and then a couple of years later we'll burn this spring and then this fall, and we'll kind of move this around, and we'll have all of these unburned areas in time and create this really heterogeneous, diverse mosaic. And that's kind of the widely accepted approach right now.
Okay.
That's how we were doing it. But it dawned on me that, why do it that way? Well, the reason for doing it that way is because we don't want to kill all the bugs and things like that. And there's, especially from the butterfly folks, there's really strong opposition to the use of fire.
Oh.
We started burning everything every year because what we realized was When you leave that patchiness like that, it's meaningful to an egotistical human being looking at a computer screen, looking at an aerial photo. It means absolutely nothing to an ant or to a caterpillar or something small that could care less if you burned 40 acres over there and left 15 acres here. Because if they lived in that 40 acres, they're not going to make it to that 15 acres.
Okay.
So what we do now is we burn everything every year so that we burn only 1 year's accumulation of fuel. It's all standing, it's all light, and it burns through there, but it burns very lightly. And it skips around and leaves a lot of areas unburned. And those areas might be the size of these tables, or they might be the size of this room, or they might be the size of this whole block. And some areas partially burn, some areas fully burn, some areas don't burn at all. And it's leaving that random pattern all over the landscape at a scale that's much more meaningful to those critters that live there. Maybe not so meaningful to me looking at the computer screen, but much more meaningful
So
to them.
yes, the next question is, what's the next question? How does burning affect
The environment.
wildlife, critters, insects, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, certainly there can be direct mortality. If a snake happens to not make its way into its burrow and is in the path of the fire, it can be killed. Same thing with a mouse or a bird or something like that. What we've found is that the plant community is adapted to fire. It responds by having more vigorous growth. And we found that the animal community is just the same. They are adapted to this. I mean, their ancestors were living on the prairie when the prairie was burning historically. It's programmed into them. In fact, I think about years ago, one of the first fires we were doing in the woods, we were only burning 20 acres. And we lit a ring fire, which means we lit a huge circle of fire, and it was all burning into the middle. And I happened to walk in there, and it was burning in the leaf litter, in the timber. And so the fire was only flame lengths about this tall. I can easily step across that and be very safe. I can step from the unburned fuel right across the fire into the black and be very safe. And so I was walking in there, and I heard a lot of rustling in the leaves, and I looked, and there were about 7 deer that were in the middle of this, in the area that had not been burned, a ring of fire all the way around them. And they'd all run over this way, and they'd see that fire, and then they'd turn, and they'd all run over here, and there was fire. Everywhere they turned, there was fire, and it was like they were panicked. And then all of a sudden, it's like they all just kind of took a deep breath. And this was the first time that these deer had seen fire, because it was the first time we burned at Hitchcock Nature Center. Hadn't burned there in decades, and so older than these deer. They had never seen fire, but all of a sudden they just kind of, it's like they took a deep breath, and something kicked in the recesses of their brain, and they all just kind of trotted and stepped right across that fire into the black and went on their way. Like all of a sudden, that instinct just kicked in. And that's when it struck me that these critters, they'll figure it out. They know what's going on. It is programmed into them, just like it's programmed into the grasses and the wildflowers. And they deal with that fire much better than humans do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If animals have like the instinct to get out, do fires still help with extinction populations with animals? Like if there's a wildfire and so many animals get killed and stuff because they didn't make it out, would that be helping with the extinction population, or do most animals actually get out of the wildfire?
Most of them get out. There is some direct mortality, but it's a pretty low percentage. But again, you have to keep in mind that there's different kinds of fire. So if you're thinking about out west, if there's an area that hasn't been burned for many, many decades, and you get a wildfire in there, it can burn incredibly hot because there's such a buildup of fuel. Whereas if you have an area that has burned recently, and it's in a more healthy condition, you don't have as much fuel accumulated, it doesn't burn as hot. And so in those areas where it burns really, really hot, it can be devastating. It can scorch the soil and sterilize the soil. It can kill too many trees, and all of those things can lead to more indirect mortality with the wildlife. Because if the plants can't respond well, then the animals certainly can't, because the plants support all of the animals. But if you have fire that's more healthy, it's a better fire, and it's in a healthier system, it actually stimulates the system to be healthier, and that benefits the animals. Yes?
We read about all these animals that were endangered. What if, like, a fire had cornered a bunch of these endangered animals? What do you think all those animals would do? And it's, like, really tall. Because there's a bunch that really can't defend themselves.
Do you have a specific example? What kind you're thinking about?
Well, there's frogs. Well, I'm kind of thinking about, like, this little frog. It is very, 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 very rare to see. There's only, like,
Purple pig nose.
yeah, that one.
It's in India. It's in India.
Yeah.
It's in India?
Oh, so probably not going to run into wildfires in
They're
America.
really ugly.
Yeah. Well, in all those cases, it really depends on the kind of fire, and it depends on that specific organism, that kind of animal, and how they interact with their environment. If a fire happens at a time of year when an animal needs a specific plant, that can be really harmful to that animal and to that population.
Oh, it's like, burning up his
Yeah,
stash of Doritos.
Exactly. It's like if our grocery store burned down and we had no other place to get food, we'd kind of be in a pickle. And they're the same way. And we have, it's one of the arguments against burning in our area during the growing season.
Oh, okay.
Historically there would have been fires during the growing season, but you saw that map. All of Iowa was natural.
Lots of grasslands.
Yes. And so there was refugia all over the place. Then you saw the next map. There's very little left in Iowa that's natural. In fact, this is the most altered state in the country. It's the least natural state. Not a ranking that we're particularly proud of. So we have to be very sensitive to the fact that there are some critters that have very specialized needs, and if we burn through everything and just totally wipe the slate clean, that's trouble.
Okay.
What we found with our annual fire regime is it skips around, so it doesn't wipe the slate clean. It leaves that heterogeneity.
Okay. Out west, when you are fighting, do you see a lot of wildlife out there when you're fighting?
Yeah. It depends on the area where we're at.
Do they have to ever go in and rescue, to block off an area to allow deer to escape? Or that kind of a thing? Or
No. Really the approach that we take out there is try to get this fire contained.
Okay.
Whatever's within there, it's kind of on its own. We don't put firefighters in a position to save wildlife and put themselves at risk.
Okay.
The first priority for us is safety. Safety of the firefighters, the safety of the people that we're trying to protect and their homes and things like that.
Is it possible to do prescribed burns enough around where there are communities to create at least, other than a devastating fire, where fire wouldn't be able to reach the urban area?
Yeah, there are communities, especially in the Southwest, that are using mechanical thinning and then following up with prescribed fire in the outreaches of the community to try to reduce the fuel load right there. Because beyond them is national forest land and other wilderness lands that have high fuel loads. And what they're concerned about is if a fire starts there and wind is blowing towards our community,
There's nothing to stop it.
how are we going to stop it?